Are you serious, Ethan? Sophia's voice trembled, but her eyes remained locked on his, searching for any sign that he was joking, that this was just a misunderstanding, a moment of crisis they could fix. But his silence was deafening. Ethan Calloway stood firm, his hands tucked into the pockets of his perfectly tailored suit, his face unreadable. Yes, I want a divorce. The words sliced through the air like a blade. Sophia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. A cold wave of disbelief crashed over her, her stomach twisting painfully. Was this it? 15 years together, thrown away like nothing? Why? Her voice was barely a whisper, but there was a desperate plea buried in it. Ethan let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his dark hair. This isn't sudden, Sophia. We haven't been working for a long time. He hesitated, and for a fleeting second, she saw something in his eyes. Doubt. There's someone else, isn't there? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and deadly. Ethan didn't answer right away, and that was all the confirmation she needed. Sophia let out a hollow laugh, a sound filled with pain and disbelief. My God. Of course there is. Who is she? Ethan looked away, as if avoiding her gaze would make this easier. Madison. The name hit like a slap. Sophia felt the sting in her chest, the realization sinking deep into her bones. The model? The one you've been seen with in the magazines? Her voice wavered, but this time it wasn't from weakness, it was from anger. Ethan opened his mouth, probably to explain, to justify the unjustifiable. But Sophia held up a hand. Don't. Her entire body trembled, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned away, fighting to catch her breath, fighting against the surge of emotions threatening to consume her. He had betrayed her. He had replaced her. And now he had the audacity to act as if he was doing her a favor. When she finally turned back to him, her expression was cold. Don't worry, Ethan. You'll get your divorce. And I promise you, you'll regret this every single day of your life. She walked away without looking back. But as she did, she swore she saw something flicker in his gaze. Regret. But now, it was too late. Madison knew exactly what she was doing. Her body was a masterpiece, flawless curves, sun-kissed skin, long silky hair cascading down her back. But it was her eyes, those sharp, knowing blue eyes that made Ethan feel like prey rather than the hunter. She straddled his lap, fingers playing idly with the collar of his shirt, her lips curving into a seductive smile. You're tense. Her voice was a sultry whisper against his ear, warm and teasing. The scent of jasmine and vanilla wrapped around him, intoxicating. Ethan let out a slow breath, his hands settling on her waist, fingers tracing the curve of her hips through the silky fabric of her dress. I've got a lot on my mind. Madison tilted her head, pretending to be concerned, but he knew better. She wasn't here to comfort him. She was here to consume him. Thinking about her? She murmured, pressing her lips against the side of his neck, sucking lightly. Ethan's grip on her tightened, his jaw clenching. Sophia. Her name flickered through his mind like a cruel whisper taunting him. He should have shut it down, should have lost himself in Madison the way he once thought he would. Instead, he stayed still, letting her mouth move along his skin, her tongue tracing the faint pulse at his throat. Madison smiled against him, mistaking his silence for surrender. Let me take your mind off things. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was slow, deliberate, meant to unravel him. She tasted like red wine and sin. Ethan responded out of instinct, his hands sliding up her back, pulling her closer, feeling the way her body molded against his. The dress she wore clung to every inch of her, offering him the kind of pleasure most men would kill for. And yet, he felt nothing. He deepened the kiss, desperate to silence the nagging ache in his chest, the voice whispering that this wasn't what he wanted. Madison let out a soft moan, shifting against him, her fingers sliding beneath his shirt, nails raking over his abs. She was fire and hunger, pushing, pulling, demanding. Ethan let his hands travel lower, gripping the bare skin of her thighs, feeling the warmth there, the invitation. But when he closed his eyes, it wasn't Madison he saw. It was Sophia. The way she used to shiver when he kissed that spot just below her ear. The way her body melted into his as if she were made for him. The way her lips, always so soft, never felt like an obligation but a need. Ethan pulled away abruptly. Madison frowned, lips swollen, breathing unsteady. "What's wrong?" He stared at her for a long moment before shaking his head, running a hand through his hair. "Nothing, I need a drink." Madison narrowed her eyes, suspicion creeping into her gaze. But she didn't press, because deep down, she already knew. Ethan Callaway never looked back. His life was built on forward momentum, winning, conquering, taking. But that night, as he lay in bed with Madison curled up beside him, the sheets tangled around their bodies, he felt empty. She was asleep, her breath soft against his shoulder, her toned leg draped possessively over his, and yet he felt alone. He turned his head toward the ceiling, exhaling sharply. Damn it! Sophia's face flashed in his mind, uninvited and relentless. Not the broken version of her, the one he left behind, but the version he saw tonight, at the gala across the room, standing tall, radiant, untouchable. The midnight blue dress sculpted to her curves, leaving her shoulders bare, her hair in loose waves, framing her delicate yet fierce expression, and her lips painted a deep shade of red, tempting, infuriating, not for him. She didn't look like the woman he left. She looked like the woman who had survived him. Ethan clenched his jaw. His body burned with a different kind of hunger, one that had nothing to do with sex and everything to do with ownership, with need, with regret. He threw off the covers and got out of bed, running a hand through his hair as he walked toward the balcony. The city lights stretched before him, but his mind was stuck in that ballroom on the moment their eyes met. It lasted only seconds, but in that fleeting glance he felt everything, the heat, the history, the unspoken words. She didn't falter, didn't look away, didn't let him see anything except the cold, detached confidence of a woman who had outgrown him. And that drove him insane. "Can't sleep?" Madison's voice was thick with drowsiness as she propped herself up on one elbow, the sheet slipping down her body, exposing smooth, golden skin. Ethan barely spared her a glance. "Just thinking." She smiled, slow and sultry, stretching like a cat before slipping out of bed. She walked toward him, bare feet silent on the cold floor, the dim city glow casting soft shadows over her curves. "Let me fix that." Her hands slid up his back, nails grazing the tense muscles in his shoulders before she pressed herself against him, warm and inviting. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. This should be enough. But it wasn't. Because no matter how perfect Madison's body was, no matter how eager her hands, she wasn't Sophia. And he hated that he still wanted her. Madison kissed his shoulder, her lips moving to his neck, her fingers tracing slow, deliberate patterns over his skin. "Come back to bed, Ethan." He turned, gripping her waist, feeling the softness beneath his fingers. Madison smirked, mistaking his intensity for something else. "That's more like it." But Ethan didn't kiss her. Instead, he whispered against her lips, voice low and raw. "Do you ever wonder if you made the wrong choice?" The smirk faltered, just for a second, but Ethan saw it, and that's when he knew. She already felt him slipping away. Ethan Callaway didn't chase women. Women chased him. They fell at his feet, desperate for his attention, eager to be claimed by a man who had it all: wealth, power, control. But Sophia wasn't just any woman, and tonight she was running. Not in the literal sense. No, she was too composed for that, too deliberate. But he saw it in her eyes at the gala, in the way she let Gabriel touch her, in the way she smiled at another man, just to remind Ethan that she didn't need him anymore. Bullshit. He let her slip away once. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. That's why he followed her. Sophia stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights, her back straight, her shoulders squared. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten, a way that made him feel something he had spent years pretending didn't exist: regret. He walked up behind her, close enough to feel the heat radiating off her skin, close enough that he knew she could sense him. Running away again. She stiffened but didn't turn. Following me again? Ethan smirked, even though she couldn't see it. God, she knew how to play this game. You left our dance unfinished. Finally, she turned, her gaze steady, unreadable. I didn't realize we had anything left to finish. Ethan took another step forward, closing the distance between them. He let his fingers trail lightly down her arm, slow, deliberate. Her skin erupted in goosebumps. You always did hate leaving things undone. Sophia inhaled sharply, but she didn't move away. Instead, she lifted her chin, eyes burning with something between defiance and temptation. Maybe I learned to let go. Ethan chuckled, low and dark. Liar! Her lips parted just slightly, and Ethan saw the moment she lost control of her breath. A small tell, but enough. His fingers traced the inside of her wrist, feeling the erratic pulse beneath his touch. Say the word, Sophia. Tell me to stop. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. The city hummed around them, the world oblivious to the war waging between them. For a split second, he thought she might cave. But then, just as quickly, she pulled away. Ethan didn't stop her. He let his hand drop, watching as she stepped back, her mask slipping back into place. I don't play your games anymore, Ethan. He smiled, slow and knowing. Then why are you still here? Sophia hesitated, and in that moment, he knew he had already won. Sophia knew she should leave. She should turn around, walk away, let Ethan disappear into the past where he belonged. But her body betrayed her. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her breath shallow, her skin still tingling from the ghost of his touch. Ethan stepped closer, his scent wrapping around her like a noose, woodsy, dark, intoxicating. The kind of scent that stuck to your skin, that you couldn't wash away no matter how hard you tried. Tell me you don't feel this. His voice was low, rough, cutting straight through her defenses. Sophia forced herself to meet his gaze, but it was a mistake. Those damn eyes. Piercing, hungry, full of the kind of promises that ruined women like her. He lifted a hand, fingers barely grazing the curve of her jaw, tracing down to the column of her throat. His touch was fire and restraint, seduction and torment. She shivered. Ethan's lips curled slightly. You're trembling. Sophia swallowed hard. It's cold. Lie. The air between them was thick, charged, suffocating. Ethan tilted his head, watching her like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. If you want me to stop, tell me now. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, slow, teasing, igniting something deep inside her that she had spent years trying to bury. Sophia inhaled sharply, her body swaying ever so slightly toward him. Damn it. Ethan saw it, felt it, knew it, and then, before she could stop it, his mouth crashed against hers. The kiss was raw, desperate, fueled by years of tension, by unspoken words and unfinished moments. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her against him, pressing her soft curves into the solid heat of his body. Sophia gasped against his lips, and Ethan took advantage, deepening the kiss, his tongue sliding against hers in a slow, sensual dance. God! She hated how good he still felt, how perfectly their bodies fit together, like no time had passed, like nothing had ever broken them. His hands roamed lower, fingers gripping the fabric of her dress, pulling her impossibly closer. She felt every inch of him, every sharp plane, every hard muscle, and she wanted more. Her fingers tangled in his hair, nails digging into his scalp as she kissed him back with the same desperation, the same hunger. Ethan groaned, the sound vibrating through her, sending heat pooling deep in her belly. But then, as suddenly as it started, she pushed him away. Breathing heavily, she took a step back, her lips swollen, her body betraying her with every tremble. Ethan didn't move. He just stood there watching her, chest rising and falling, lips curved in that damn knowing smirk. Tell me, that meant nothing. Sophia opened her mouth. No words came out, because she couldn't, not yet. So she did the only thing she could. She turned and walked away, but Ethan didn't look disappointed. No. He looked like a man who had just won his first battle. Sophia slammed the door behind her, pressing her back against the cold wood, as if that alone could hold her together. Her chest heaved, her lips still tingling from Ethan's kiss. Damn him. She dragged a trembling hand through her hair, trying to push him out of her head, but it was useless. The way his hands gripped her, the raw hunger in his touch, the way he knew exactly how to break her, it was all seared into her skin. She should have slapped him, should have walked away before it ever happened. But she hadn't. And now she was paying the price. Ethan Callaway didn't lose. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, jaw tight as he replayed every second of that kiss. She still wanted him. He felt it in the way her body pressed into his, in the way her fingers dug into his hair, the way her breath hitched the second his lips met hers. But she ran. Again. His phone buzzed beside him, yanking him out of his thoughts. Madison. He let it ring. His mind was already somewhere else. Madison knew something was wrong the moment Ethan walked through the door. He didn't say a word, just went straight to the bar, pouring himself a drink with a tension in his shoulders that she recognized all too well. She slipped off the robe she'd been wearing, letting the silk pool at her feet, leaving only the thin lace of her lingerie. She was stunning, every curve perfectly sculpted, every movement deliberate, seductive. Any other man would have fallen to his knees for her. But Ethan, he didn't even look. Madison's jaw clenched, but she kept her voice smooth. Late night. Ethan tossed back his drink. You could say that. She walked toward him, slow and graceful, running a perfectly manicured finger down his chest, nails scraping lightly over the fabric of his shirt. Let me take care of you. She pressed against him, warm and inviting, her lips grazing the edge of his jaw. Ethan closed his eyes, inhaling sharply. His hands came up, gripping her waist, feeling the heat of her bare skin. But that was all. Madison tilted her head, confused. What's wrong? Ethan exhaled, pulling back just enough to look at her. His grip was firm, but there was no fire behind it. And that's when Madison knew. He wasn't thinking about her. He was thinking about Sophia. Her nails dug into his chest just enough to sting. She got to you, didn't she? Ethan didn't answer, because they both already knew the truth. Ethan Callaway didn't do regret. But as he sat in his office, staring at the city skyline, the taste of Sophia still lingered on his lips, and it was driving him insane. He should have been focused on work, on the million-dollar deals that used to be his only obsession. But nothing held his attention anymore, not when every time he closed his eyes, all he saw was her. The way she trembled beneath his hands, the way her breath hitched when his lips met hers. The way she still melted for him, even when she swore she wouldn't. His jaw tightened. She wanted him. She just didn't want to admit it. And that was unacceptable. Ethan didn't hesitate as he grabbed his phone, dialing the one number he knew by heart. I need to see you. Silence. Then finally, Sophia's voice. Steady, sharp, dangerously controlled. We have nothing left to talk about, Ethan. His lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. Then meet me and prove it. Sophia should have said no. She should have blocked his number, slammed the door on the past, walked away like a woman who had truly moved on. But when she saw him that night, standing by the bar, looking devastatingly composed in a crisp black suit, his whiskey swirling in one hand, his gaze burning straight through her, she knew she was in trouble. Ethan took his time looking her over, eyes dragging over the sleek black dress, hugging every curve, the delicate strap barely hanging off her shoulder. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "You wore that on purpose." Sophia let out a small laugh, tilting her head as she took a sip of her drink. "You really think I dressed for you?" Ethan smirked, stepping closer, the heat of his body a silent, unspoken threat. "I know you did." The air between them was thick, charged, pulsing with unresolved tension, a collision waiting to happen. And then, just to prove him wrong, she reached for Gabriel's hand. Ethan went still, his grip on his glass tightened, his jaw clenching almost imperceptibly. Gabriel, charming, polite, utterly oblivious, smiled at her, pressing a light kiss to her cheek as he whispered something into her ear. And Ethan, he saw red. The bastard wasn't touching her. No, not the way Ethan had. Not the way Ethan knew she wanted. Sophia met his gaze from across the room, her expression calm, detached. But her eyes, they were teasing him, testing him. Ethan downed the rest of his whiskey and set the glass aside. Then he started walking, directly toward her. Game on. Sophia felt the shift in the air the moment Ethan started walking toward her. Her pulse quickened, a traitorous heat creeping up her spine as he closed the distance between them. Steady, controlled, predatory. Gabriel was still talking, still smiling, still utterly unaware that a storm was about to hit. Ethan stopped just inches away, his presence overwhelming, his gaze burning into hers. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. Sophia arched a brow, tilting her head just slightly, pretending not to feel the raw tension wrapping around them like a vice. "I'm here with someone." Ethan's lips curled at the edges, slow and smug, infuriatingly confident. "And yet, you're looking at me." Gabriel finally noticed the shift in energy, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Everything all right, Soph?" Ethan didn't look away from her, didn't blink. Sophia hesitated. She should say no. She should pull Gabriel close and make Ethan suffer the way he once made her suffer. But the problem was, Ethan was right. She was looking at him. She had been looking at him all damn night. So instead of answering, she did the one thing she knew would ruin her. She took his hand. Ethan pulled her onto the dance floor, wasting no time. His hands found her waist, his grip firm, possessive. He pulled her in until there was no space between them, her soft curves pressing into his solid frame. Sophia swallowed hard, her breath shallow as his scent surrounded her, rich, dark, undeniably male. "You shouldn't be doing this." Her voice was a whisper, almost a plea. Ethan leaned in, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear. "But you're letting me." His fingers slid lower, tracing the curve of her hip, pressing into the silk fabric of her dress. Sophia inhaled sharply, her body betraying her with a shiver. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. He tilted his head, trailing his nose along her jaw, the barest hint of his lips grazing her skin. "You still belong to me." Her nails dug into his shoulder, her body igniting at his words. "You're delusional." Ethan chuckled low and dark, his fingers slipping along the small of her back, pressing her even closer. "Then why do you feel like this?" Sophia's breath hitched. Damn him. She could feel the heat rolling off his body, could feel every inch of him against her, hard, unyielding, dangerous. Their movements slowed, turning into something intimate, something that had nothing to do with the music and everything to do with the past, clawing its way back to the surface. Ethan's hand slid up, his thumb grazing the side of her breast as he reached her collarbone, his touch setting fire to every nerve in her body. Her lips parted, a soft, shaky exhale escaping. Ethan caught it. He leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. "Tell me you don't want me." Sophia's fingers clenched around the fabric of his suit. She should lie, she should push him away, but she didn't. And that was her first mistake. Ethan had won. He felt it in the way Sophia's body melted into his, in the way her breath hitched when his hands traveled down her spine, in the way she didn't push him away. She was his again, she just didn't know it yet. But then, before he could claim the victory fully, she vanished. 1 second he was holding her, owning her. The next, she was gone. Her warmth ripped from him, her scent lingering in the air like a cruel reminder of what he almost had. Almost. And Ethan Calloway didn't do almost. Back at his penthouse, the tension coiled in his chest, refused to unwind. Sophia had cracked. He knew it, so why the hell had she run? He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in his glass as he leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window, the city stretched out below him. He should have felt triumphant, but instead, he felt restless, hungry, frustrated. Then he heard her. "You look like a man who lost something." Ethan didn't turn. He knew the voice, knew the game. Madison stood by the bar, wearing nothing but one of his shirts, the sleeves rolled up, the hem barely covering the lace of her underwear. Her blonde hair was tousled, messy in the way that was meant to look effortless. Her bare legs crossed as she leaned against the counter, but Ethan felt nothing. "What do you want, Madison?" She smirked, slow and lazy, like she had all the time in the world. "What I always want." She moved toward him, her fingers gliding over his chest, tracing the crisp fabric of his shirt. "You." Ethan exhaled, already tired of the game. "It's over." Her hand stilled, just for a second, before she let out a soft laugh. "Oh, baby. Nothing is ever over." Then, before he could react, her lips were on his. She kissed him hard, her body pressing against his, hands tangling in his hair, nails raking over his skin. Desperate, reckless, a woman who knew she was losing. Ethan didn't kiss her back, didn't touch her. He just let her realize it. After a moment, Madison pulled away, her breathing heavy, her eyes flashing with something sharp. Panic. "She got to you?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Madison took a step back, shaking her head with a slow, bitter smile. "You think you can just walk away from me?" She reached for her phone, her fingers swift as she typed something, her expression turning cold. Then she met his gaze, her voice dripping with venom. "Let's see if Sophia still wants you when I'm done." She turned on her heel, disappearing down the hallway. And Ethan? He didn't move, because for the first time in years, he realized he had underestimated the wrong woman. "Esse conteúdo pode violar nossas políticas de uso. Erramos? Envie uma desaprovação, polegar para baixo, a esta resposta para nos avisar." Ethan Calloway knew when he was being played, but this time, he had let his guard down. Madison was dangerous when she felt cornered. And tonight, as he watched her disappear into the shadows of his penthouse, he knew she wasn't walking away without leaving destruction in her wake. The question was, how much damage had she already done? His phone vibrated in his pocket. When he pulled it out, his stomach clenched, a notification, a message, and a link from Madison. He opened it, and there it was, his downfall neatly packaged for the world to see, photos, dozens of them. Of him and Madison, tangled in sheets, lost in moments he had long since stopped caring about. Some were old, some were from nights when he was already thinking about Sophia. But that didn't matter, because Sophia would see them, and Madison knew that was all it would take. Sophia's hands shook as she scrolled through her phone. The images were everywhere, her stomach twisted, a sickening mix of rage and humiliation crawling under her skin. She had been so stupid to let Ethan back in. To believe, even for a second, that he had changed, that she meant more than a conquest. Her phone buzzed again. Ethan. She stared at his name on the screen, her pulse hammering. She could answer. She could demand explanations, scream at him, let him try to convince her that this was a mistake, or she could do what she should have done a long time ago. Walk away. Ethan's car screeched to a stop in front of Sophia's building. He knew she had seen it, knew exactly what Madison had done. But she needed to hear the truth from him. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart racing. The second he reached her door, he knocked, his patience already wearing thin. No answer. He knocked again, louder, nothing. Then, finally, the door swung open. But it wasn't Sophia standing there. It was Gabriel. Ethan's vision blurred with rage. Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, casual, unaffected, like he belonged there. "She doesn't want to see you, Calloway." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "I'm not leaving until I talk to her." Gabriel smirked, slow and deliberate. "Then you're wasting your time." He moved to close the door, but Ethan slammed his hand against it, keeping it open. "I know you think you're winning, that she's moving on with you." He stepped closer, voice low, dangerous. "But when she closes her eyes at night, it's not you she's thinking about." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Good." Ethan didn't wait for a response. He pushed past him, stepping into the apartment, his eyes searching, and then he saw her. Sophia stood by the window, arms crossed over her chest, expression unreadable. But her eyes, they were full of fire. "Get out, Ethan!" His heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. "Not until you listen." Sophia let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "I don't care what you have to say." Ethan took a step closer. "That's a lie." She scoffed, but he saw it. The way her fingers trembled slightly, the way she swallowed hard. She was hurt. And that was worse than her hatred. He softened his voice, his next words laced with raw honesty. "You know me, Sophia. You know what's real and what's not." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "You destroyed me once. I won't let you do it again." Ethan's chest tightened. He had never begged for anything in his life, but for her, he would. "Let me fix this." Sophia met his gaze, her lips parted, her body still caught in the war between love and self-preservation. Then, after a long, excruciating pause, she whispered, "I don't think you can." And just like that, Ethan Calloway felt what it was like to lose. Ethan Calloway never begged. But as he stood in Sophia's apartment, staring into her stormy eyes, he realized he was on the verge of doing exactly that. And he hated it. But he hated losing her even more. She was standing so close, yet she felt miles away. Her arms were still crossed, a defensive barrier between them, between what they were and what they could have been. "Sophia, don't." Her voice was sharp, final, but her hands were trembling. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. He took a step closer, slow, measured, watching the way her breath faltered. She was still affected. "You don't believe this?" Sophia let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable." She turned away, staring out the window, but Ethan didn't let her run. Not again. He moved behind her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth, his presence, the weight of what they were. His voice was low, rough. "I know you saw the pictures, but I also know you, Sophia, and you know damn well that I haven't touched Madison in months." Her shoulders tensed. A reaction, a crack. Ethan pressed on. "You want to believe I haven't changed? That I'm still the selfish bastard who let you go?" He leaned in, his breath fanning over her bare shoulder. "But if that were true, then why are you still here?" Sophia closed her eyes. Damn him. Damn him for always knowing exactly how to get under her skin, because he was right. She wanted to hate him, wanted to scream at him, push him away, erase the part of her that still burned for him. But her body remembered. the way he touched her, the way he set her on fire with just a look, just a whisper of his fingers against her skin. Ethan knew it too. His hands found her hips, slow, deliberate. His fingers slid over the fabric of her dress, tracing the curve of her waist, igniting every nerve in her body. She sucked in a sharp breath. Stop! But she didn't pull away. Ethan's lips brushed against her ear. Say it like you mean it. Sophia shivered. Her resolve was crumbling. She hated how easy it was for him, how effortlessly he unraveled her defenses. Then, before she could stop herself, she turned, face to face, chest to chest, and suddenly, it was just them. Ethan studied her, his eyes dark, intense, filled with hunger. You still want me? Sophia's heart pounded against her ribs. She did. God help her, she did. But wanting him had never been the problem. Trusting him was. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. Then just when Ethan thought she might give in, she stepped back. And for the first time, Ethan was the one left standing alone. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. You don't get to break me twice. She turned, walking toward the door, her every movement a quiet act of defiance. Ethan clenched his jaw, his body screaming to follow her, to fix this. But deep down, for the first time, he wondered, maybe he already lost her. Ethan Calloway had never felt powerless. But as he watched Sophia walk away, her spine straight, her steps unwavering, he felt it now. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his body rigid with frustration, regret, and something far more dangerous. Desperation. Because he knew. If she walked out that door, he might never get her back. And that was unacceptable. Sophia's heart pounded so violently, it was a wonder she could still move. She kept walking, kept breathing, kept forcing one foot in front of the other. She didn't dare look back, because if she did, she wasn't sure she'd have the strength to leave. Ethan's touch still burned on her skin, his voice still echoed in her head, his presence still wrapped around her like a vice, suffocating and intoxicating all at once. He was her greatest weakness, and if she wasn't careful, he would destroy her all over again. The second her fingers wrapped around the door handle, Ethan moved. Fast, determined. He grabbed her wrist, spinning her around, his grip firm but not forceful. His eyes, God, those damn eyes, were wild, dark, pleading. Ethan Calloway never pleaded. And yet, here he was, standing before her, looking at her like she was the only thing keeping him breathing. Don't do this. His voice was low, raw, stripped of arrogance. Sophia swallowed hard, fighting against everything her body wanted. You don't get to ask that. Ethan exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening, but he didn't let go. I know I hurt you, and I know I don't deserve another chance. His fingers brushed against hers, barely there, but enough to make her shiver. But tell me you don't feel this. Tell me you don't want me. Tell me, and I'll let you go. Sophia parted her lips. To say what? She didn't even know anymore because it wasn't that simple. She wanted him, she always had. But wanting him had never been enough. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, gathering what little strength she had left. When she opened them, her voice was soft, but firm. I can't do this again. Ethan's expression flickered. Pain. Real, visceral pain. But then, slowly, he let go. His fingers slid away from hers, the loss of contact like a severed lifeline. Sophia stepped back, her chest tight, her legs weak. She turned, and this time, he didn't stop her. Ethan stood frozen, listening to the sound of the door closing behind her, and for the first time in his life, he felt what it was like to truly lose, to have everything he ever wanted standing inches away, and still slipping through his fingers. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was really gone. But deep down, he knew. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Because Ethan Calloway, he never gave up on what was his. Months had passed. The city moved on. Deals were made, fortunes rose and fell, and life continued as if nothing had happened. But Ethan Calloway? He hadn't moved on. He built empires, closed impossible deals, controlled markets with a single decision. But the one thing he couldn't control, the one thing he couldn't win back was her. Sophia Carter had vanished from his world, slipping away like smoke through his fingers. And it was his fault. He saw glimpses of her sometimes, across a crowded gala, stepping into a black car, laughing at something another man whispered in her ear. Each time it gutted him, because he knew that laugh. He knew her. And he knew no matter how far she ran, no matter how many walls she built, she still felt him. She just refused to admit it. It was raining the night he saw her again. A soft drizzle misted the city, blurring streetlights and turning everything silver. Ethan had left a meeting late, his driver navigating the quiet streets when someone caught his eye. Sophia, walking alone, arms wrapped around herself, lost in thought. She was beautiful. He told the driver to stop. Sophia heard him before she saw him, the deep purr of an expensive car rolling to a stop, the quiet click of a door opening, and then him standing there, looking at her like she was the only thing that had ever mattered. Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then finally, Ethan spoke. "It's been a long time." Sophia swallowed. Her heart betrayed her with its wild, reckless rhythm. "Not long enough." A ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. God, that smile. "You look good." Sophia exhaled slowly, steadying herself against the pull of him. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan stepped closer, slow, deliberate, watching her reaction. "I think you knew I'd find you eventually." She hated that he was right. Hated that deep down, a part of her had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him. She let out a shaky laugh, tilting her head. "What do you want, Ethan?" His eyes darkened. "You." He didn't say it, didn't need to. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulling out something small, silver. Sophia frowned, her fingers hesitating before taking it. A key. Her key. The one she had left in his penthouse the night she walked away. Her throat tightened. Damn him. "You kept this?" Ethan's voice was quiet, raw. "I never stopped waiting for you to come back." Sophia's fingers curled around the cold metal, her pulse hammering. This was dangerous. He was dangerous. Because he was still the only man who could ruin her. She lifted her gaze to his, searching for something, a reason to run, but all she saw was truth. And just like that, she knew that despite everything, despite the past, the pain, the war between them, he was still hers. And maybe he always would be. Love is messy, it's reckless, painful, and sometimes it's a choice we have to make over and over again. Ethan and Sophia proved that desire can burn, but only love has the power to rebuild what was broken. But what about you? Would you have taken him back? Would you risk your heart one more time? Tell me in the comments, was this a mistake or was this fate? And if you love stories that push the limits of passion and redemption, there's another one waiting for you right now on the screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.